Just the white feather and the Soviet rifle. The morning frost clung to the pine needles like crystal tears when Staff Sergeant Marcus White Feather Thompson first laid eyes on the Soviet SVT-40 rifle in the abandoned supply depot. February 1943, somewhere in the dense forests of northern Russia, where the 82nd Airborne had been cut off from their main force for 6 days. His squad mates laughed when he stripped the weapon from a frozen Red Army corpse, running calloused fingers along the semi-automatic mechanism they'd been taught to dismiss as communist junk. "Stick with the Garand, Feather," Corporal Davidson had sneered, breath visible in the -20 air. "That Russian piece will jam the moment you need it most." The nickname came from the single white eagle feather Thompson kept tucked in his helmet band, a gift from his Cherokee grandfather who taught him to hunt white-tailed deer in the Oklahoma hills with nothing but patience and perfectly controlled breathing. What his squad didn't know was that Thompson had been studying captured Soviet weapons manuals during quiet moments, fascinated by their different approach to warfare, their acceptance of good-enough engineering that somehow worked when American precision failed. The forest line they were ordered to hold stretched barely 800 yards, a thin defensive position protecting the evacuation route for 3 companies of wounded. German advance scouts had been probing their flanks for 2 days, testing for weakness. Major Collins had made it clear, if this line broke, 400 American soldiers would be trapped in a pocket with no way out. Thompson's squad held the eastern anchor, the most exposed position, where the tree line curved toward a frozen meadow that offered perfect fields of fire but no cover for retreat. In the pre-dawn darkness, Thompson examined the SVT-40 by touch, feeling the weight distribution his grandfather had taught him to read in any weapon. The rifle felt different from his M1 Garand, heavier in some places, surprisingly light in others. The stock bore scratches and dings, evidence of hard use, but the action cycled smoothly even in the brutal cold that had turned their breath into clouds of ice crystals. "You planning to trust your life to that thing?" Private Martinez whispered from the next foxhole. Thompson didn't answer. He was remembering his grandfather's words about judging tools by their results, not their appearance. The old Cherokee hunter had used whatever rifle worked best for the conditions, sometimes a pristine Winchester, sometimes a battered surplus Enfield that shot straight when fancy guns failed. What happened in the next 30 minutes would quietly change everything Thompson thought he knew about warfare. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this situation, and stay with us for the next chapters. When survival depends on unconventional wisdom, how quickly can a soldier abandon everything he's been taught? That first morning with the SVT-40, Thompson discovered something his training manuals had never mentioned. The rifle's gas system operated differently in extreme cold than American weapons. Where his M1 Garand had been sluggish in sub-zero temperatures, requiring constant maintenance to prevent the operating rod from freezing, the Soviet rifle seemed to embrace the brutal conditions. The looser tolerances his instructors had mocked as sloppy craftsmanship actually prevented ice buildup that would jam tighter mechanisms. But the real revelation came when Thompson applied his grandfather's hunting wisdom to the weapon's unique rhythm. The SVT-40's semi-automatic fire required a different breathing pattern than bolt-action precision shooting. Instead of the single-held breath taught in sniper school, Thompson developed what he privately called slow breath, a controlled, meditative breathing cycle that matched the rifle's slightly heavier trigger pull and longer reset time. Inhale during target acquisition, exhale halfway, and hold during aim. Fire on the natural respiratory pause, then continue the exhale while cycling to the next target. The technique required him to think differently about everything: timing, target selection, even the way he positioned his body in the frozen earth of the foxhole. His grandfather had always said that the best hunters learned to become part of their tools, to understand the rhythm of each weapon like a heartbeat. In the bitter cold of the Russian forest, with German patrols moving through the trees like grey ghosts, Thompson began to understand what the old man had meant. The SVT-40 wasn't trying to be an American rifle. It was designed for different conditions, different tactics, different ways of thinking about warfare itself. "What are you mumbling about over there?" Davidson called softly. "Just talking to my rifle," Thompson replied, not entirely joking. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of snow and something else, wood smoke from German field kitchens somewhere beyond the tree line. Thompson adjusted his grip on the Soviet rifle, feeling its weight settle into his shoulder differently than any weapon he'd ever used. The white feather in his helmet band stirred in the frigid breeze, a reminder of home and teachings that somehow made more sense here than any field manual ever had. Major Collins appeared at their position just before dawn, moving from foxhole to foxhole with quiet efficiency. His breath came in steady puffs as he checked their readiness for what everyone knew would be another day of German probes testing their defenses. "That's not standard issue," the major observed, looking at the SVT-40. "No, sir. Found it yesterday. My Garand's been freezing up in this cold." Collins nodded curtly and moved on. But Thompson noticed the major's eyes lingering on the Soviet rifle with something that might have been curiosity rather than disapproval. "How do you tell the difference between adapting to survive and betraying everything you were taught to believe?" The technique proved itself on the morning of February 18th, when a full German patrol, 12 men in winter camouflage, attempted to infiltrate through the eastern sector. Thompson's squad mates were still checking their frozen rifle actions when he engaged the lead elements at 300 yards. The slow breath technique allowed him to maintain accuracy while firing rapidly, dropping 4 Germans before they could take proper cover. The survivors, convinced they faced a much larger force, withdrew and reported a heavily defended strongpoint to their commanders. Word of the engagement spread quickly through the defensive line. Soldiers began requesting permission to observe Thompson's position, trying to understand how one man with a junk Soviet rifle was outperforming entire squads equipped with superior American weapons. Private First Class Jenny Walsh, a radio operator from Major Collins' headquarters, crouched in Thompson's foxhole during a lull in the action. She'd grown up in Minnesota, and the Russian winter reminded her of home, in ways that made her homesick and strangely comfortable at the same time. "My dad hunts with whatever works," she said quietly, watching Thompson clean the SVT-40. "Says a rifle's just a tool. Tools don't have politics." Thompson looked at her with new interest. "What's your dad hunt?" "Deer, mostly. Some elk. He taught me to shoot when I was 8. Said the animal doesn't care what kind of rifle you're carrying, as long as you know how to use it." That afternoon, a letter arrived from Thompson's wife, Sarah, in Oklahoma. Her handwriting looked shaky, tired. She wrote about rationing, about their neighbor's son killed in the Pacific, about how the Cherokee elders were praying for all the young men fighting far from home. She mentioned that his grandfather had sent tobacco for him to burn if he needed to talk to the ancestors. Thompson folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his coat. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, using a Soviet weapon to kill Germans while defending a position in Russia, carrying tobacco blessed by Cherokee elders and a white eagle feather that had become his talisman of survival. Major Collins appeared again at their position, this time bringing his binoculars. He watched through them as Thompson demonstrated the slow breath technique, engaging targets of opportunity with the SVT-40. What the major saw challenged everything he'd been taught about small unit tactics. "How many rounds you figure you fired through that thing?" Collins asked. "Maybe 200, sir. Hasn't jammed once." "And your Garand?" "Froze up 3 times yesterday before I switched." The major said nothing for a long moment, just watched Thompson's steady breathing pattern, the methodical way he worked the Soviet rifle's action. "Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. When your life depends on abandoning doctrine, what becomes the new truth you carry forward? Major Collins himself visited the Eastern Anchor regularly now, watching through binoculars as Thompson demonstrated the slow breath technique using the SVT-40 to engage targets of opportunity. The Major's initial skepticism transformed into quiet amazement as he witnessed something that challenged everything he'd been taught about small unit tactics. Thompson wasn't just an exceptionally skilled marksman. He was proving that unconventional methods, when properly understood and applied, could multiply the effectiveness of a single soldier beyond all reasonable expectation. Dr. Elena Kozlov moved through the aid station with practiced efficiency, treating both American and German wounded with the same careful attention. She'd been a civilian doctor in Leningrad before the war, conscripted into military service when the siege began. Now she found herself attached to a joint medical unit, treating casualties from all sides in this forgotten corner of the Russian front. She noticed the American soldier with the white feather, the one the others called White Feather, when he brought in wounded from his sector. Unlike the others, he showed no surprise at being treated by a Soviet doctor, no hesitation in following her instructions. When she cleaned a shrapnel wound on his shoulder, he mentioned quietly that his grandfather had been a medicine man. "Different traditions," she said in careful English. "Same understanding of healing." Thompson nodded, then surprised her by asking about the SVT-40 rifle he carried. "My brother designed improvements for that model," she said. "Before Stalingrad, he believed weapons should work with the soldier, not against him. It saved my life more than once." Dr. Kozlov studied his face. "In Russia, we say tools have no politics, only purpose." Over the next 4 days, as German pressure intensified, Thompson's mastery of the SVT-40 and slow breath technique became the psychological backbone of the entire defense. His ability to engage multiple targets rapidly and accurately convinced enemy reconnaissance that they faced a reinforced position rather than a skeleton crew of exhausted paratroopers. Every German probe that approached the eastern sector met withering, precisely placed fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But it was the small moments between engagements that began to reshape Thompson's understanding of the war. Dr. Kozlov shared stories about her brother, the rifle designer who died at Stalingrad. She spoke of weapons as extensions of human intent, tools that reflected the wisdom or foolishness of their users. "Your grandfather's feather," she observed one evening as Thompson cleaned the SVT-40. "It reminds you of who you are beneath the uniform." Thompson touched the white eagle feather tucked in his helmet band. "He said it would help me remember the difference between fighting and killing." "There is difference?" "Fighting is about survival. Killing is about hate. The feather reminds me to fight without hating." Dr. Kozlov nodded slowly. "My brother would have understood this. He designed rifles for soldiers to survive, not to enjoy killing. When the past and present collide in war, which version of yourself survives the encounter?" The breakthrough moment came on February 22nd, when a company-strength German assault attempted to overrun the forest line before dawn. In the grey half-light, with snow beginning to fall, Thompson's position became the crucial hinge of the entire battle. Using the slow breath technique, he maintained sustained, accurate fire for over 20 minutes, systematically disrupting the German advance while his squad mates provided ammunition and called in artillery corrections. During a brief lull in the fighting, Dr. Kozlov appeared at Thompson's position, crawling through the snow with her medical bag. She'd come to treat wounded Americans, but what she revealed to Thompson would change everything he thought he understood about the weapons he carried. "Your rifle," she said quietly, checking Private Martinez's wounded arm. "The SVT-40. You know what makes it different?" Thompson continued scanning for targets while she worked. "The tolerances, the gas system, it works in cold when precision rifles fail." "Yes, but also the man who designed it, my brother Mikhail. He studied American hunting rifles, traditional Cherokee and Lakota weapons from your museums. He believed the best tools learned from all traditions, not just one. Thompson's hands stilled on the rifle. Your brother designed this? The improvements to the gas system, the trigger mechanism, the balance. He said American military doctrine was too rigid, but American hunting wisdom was brilliant. He wanted to marry Soviet practicality with Native American understanding of how weapons should feel in human hands. She finished bandaging Martinez's arm and looked directly at Thompson. He died at Stalingrad, carrying one of these rifles. But before he died, he wrote that he hoped American soldiers might someday understand what he was trying to build. Weapons that made men more effective without making them less human. Thompson felt the white eagle feather stirring in the winter wind. His grandfather's teachings, a Soviet engineer's innovations, and his own desperate need to survive had somehow converged in this frozen forest into something none of the military manuals could have predicted. There's something else, Doctor. Kozlov continued. The prayer ribbons you've tied to the stock. My brother would have understood those too. He studied how your plains tribes blessed their weapons. He believed tools used for survival should carry prayers, not just bullets. As the German assault resumed, Thompson found himself firing the SVT-40 with a new understanding. Each shot was guided not just by military training, but by something deeper. A fusion of Cherokee wisdom, Soviet engineering, and the desperate innovation that war demanded from those who wanted to survive with their humanity intact. The rifle had become more than a weapon. It was a bridge between worlds that propaganda insisted were enemies, but which shared more common ground than their leaders would ever admit. When truth and doctrine collide in your hands, which one do you trust to keep you alive? When relief forces finally broke through later that morning, they found the eastern anchor still holding, surrounded by evidence of a desperate German withdrawal. Thompson sat quietly cleaning the SVT-40, the white feather in his helmet band, now joined by small prayer ribbons he'd tied around the rifle's stock, a Cherokee tradition for honoring tools that had served faithfully in extremis. Major Collins approached with the relief column commander, both men studying the defensive position with something approaching disbelief. The foxhole positions showed clear evidence of sustained engagement, but the kill ratios defied everything they understood about small unit tactics. "Sergeant Thompson," the major called, "the colonel would like to understand how you held this position." Thompson stood, still holding the SVT-40. "The rifle worked better in the cold, sir. And I applied some hunting techniques my grandfather taught me." The relief colonel examined the Soviet weapon with curiosity rather than disapproval. "This isn't standard issue." "No, sir. Field expedient. My Garand was jamming in the extreme temperatures." What none of them said aloud was the larger question: how had unconventional methods, a despised Soviet rifle, and Cherokee hunting wisdom combined to create tactical effects far beyond their individual components? "Doctor," Kozlov appeared at the aid station as they prepared to evacuate wounded. She approached Thompson one last time, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "From my brother's effects," she said quietly. "He would want the rifle to stay with someone who understands its purpose." She handed him a small notebook filled with technical drawings and notes in Russian, but also sketches of traditional Native American weapons and detailed observations about breathing techniques and natural shooting rhythms. He wrote that the best tools emerge when different wisdoms are allowed to learn from each other, she said. "Your grandfather and my brother, they understood the same truths from different directions." Thompson accepted the notebook, understanding that he now carried something more complex than military intelligence, a record of how human wisdom transcended the arbitrary boundaries that war created between peoples. The after-action reports would struggle to quantify what had actually happened at the Eastern Anchor. How had one soldier with an inferior weapon held a position that should have required a full platoon? Major Collins recommended Thompson for the Distinguished Service Cross, but more importantly, he quietly began questioning the rigid doctrines that had nearly cost them everything. Years later, Thompson would reflect that the forest line taught him something more valuable than any medal. True effectiveness came not from following prescribed methods, but from understanding the deeper principles behind those methods and adapting them to unexpected circumstances. The SVT-40 hadn't made him a better soldier, it had forced him to become a more thoughtful one. Back in Oklahoma after the war, Thompson kept the Soviet rifle and Mikhail Kozlov's notebook in a place of honor beside his grandfather's hunting weapons. When young Cherokee men asked about his war service, he would show them the white eagle feather and tell them about breathing techniques that had saved his life in a Russian forest. Techniques that bridged the wisdom of Cherokee hunters and Soviet engineers who had never met but understood the same fundamental truths about how humans and tools could work together with respect rather than domination. The prayer ribbons on the rifle stock had faded, but the memory remained sharp. In the coldest, most desperate circumstances, human wisdom had found a way to transcend the hatred that war demanded, revealing connections that propaganda could never entirely destroy. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. In the end, what do you carry longer, the weight of what you destroyed, or the memory of what connected you to your own humanity?